Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, dear friends, dear alumni, dear partners of the MCI, thank you again for being here. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to our 25th anniversary Jubilee event series, and to share this little lunchtime, or wherever, perhaps you are in India now, then it's already in the afternoon or someplace else in the morning, that you share your time with us, and would like to find out more on social entrepreneurship and a very distinguished personality we are happy to welcome today. Let me express my warmest welcome to William Bissell. He is the chairman of Fabindia. Despite many other activities, you are a multi-entrepreneur. Very warm welcome to you, William. You are presently in Delhi now, right?
That's correct.
Thank you so much. Before we enter the discussion and the little keynote, we will, let me please give you some indications how this event will work. Altogether, we will have roughly 1 hour at our disposal. And we will then, after a little introduction of our distinguished guest of today, we will be happy to receive a little keynote, some input by Mr. Bissell. And then there will be a Q&A session. And I already invite you to mark down some notes, some questions, and send questions, if you want to send them to me, to the following email address. It is livetalk@mci.edu. I repeat, livetalk@mci.edu. Now, before we get really started, let me also express a warm gratitude to our media partners, to our event partners. There is a number of them. Let me express my gratitude especially to der Vereinigung Österreichischer Wirtschaftsakademiker, Swarovski, Deloitte, Vöslauer, Studo, Volkswirtschaftliche Gesellschaft, and other institutions. Our media partners, the Austrian Press Association, Tiroler Tageszeitung, Südtiroler Wirtschaftszeitung, Die Presse, ESMT Berlin, and Lebensraum Holding Tirol. Great, you are sharing this event with us and partnering. Now, talking about social entrepreneurship, William, you are presently in New Delhi, and you are the chairman of Fabindia, among many other activities. Would you like to share some info about your background? Perhaps your personal or family background, or whatever you would like to share with us, and how did it come about to engage in social entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Dr. Altman, for your incredibly generous introduction. I hope during this 1 hour session I can live up to what you've said. You know, I have an interesting family history. I have an American father and an Indian mother, and both of my parents are immigrants to Delhi. Even my Indian mother, my father came here because during the Second World War, my American grandfather was sent to India, and he came here as part of the U.S. government, and he traveled the country, and he had an amazing experience. And he said that I've never seen a place like this, and he traveled extensively in the country. And so my father was a young man, and he made up his mind to come to India. And then he had an opportunity to come to India as a consultant, as a foreign consultant, working with the Indian government for 2 years. And after his 2-year job was over, he decided to stay on, and he met my mother. And my mother's family had come from what is now Pakistan, and they came from the western part of the country, which is on the border with Iran, and they were refugees because when the country was divided in 1947, they decided to leave and move to India. So in a way, it was an interesting meeting it was a foreign city for both my parents, even though my mother is Indian. And so they met, and my father was very influenced by the Gandhian movement, because the 2 years that he had spent working in India, he had worked with the last group of people who'd worked directly for Mahatma Gandhi, because this was the late 50s. And if you recall, independence was 1947. Mahatma Gandhi was a very powerful figure. He started the whole cottage industries movement in India. And so my father worked with 4 of the people who'd worked directly for Mahatma Gandhi, and he was deeply influenced by that philosophy. So for what is now being called social entrepreneurship is something we grew up with in our home. I mean, it was always something we discussed, and it was a very big part of our lives growing up. So I don't think of it as an alien concept. I think of it as something that I've grown up with.
Thank you so much. And you have been engaging with your family, but now it's in your hands especially, with social entrepreneurship. And you have been engaging also with all your energy in several projects. Would you like to share something about these projects? And perhaps also, what do you understand by social entrepreneurship? What is your understanding? You know, there's different meanings related to social entrepreneurship. What is your concept and your philosophy?
Well, thanks, Dr. Altman, because one of the things that's happening the last 3 or 4 years is that the term social entrepreneurship has become incredibly fashionable. Everybody today, every business meeting starts with social entrepreneurship. Even the most capitalist of companies have to have the word somewhere in their top 3 slides. You know, they have to have social entrepreneurship somewhere. And you see some of these business executives looking a little uncomfortable, but they've been told they have to present it. So, but, jokes aside, the social entrepreneurship is a very well-developed field. It has a philosophy, it has an ideology. And, if I may take a few minutes of everybody's time to just explain what I mean by social entrepreneurship. And at the heart of social entrepreneurship is a movement against the monetization of everything. We are living in a world today where everything is monetized. Recently, I was struck by this because somebody was supposed to introduce me to somebody else. And they then sent me an email. I got an email from their assistant saying, we charge $5,000 for the introduction. So if I was to introduce them to somebody to you, and then write an email to them and say that I'm going to charge $5,000 for the introduction. And this is when I say everything has been monetized. We have sadly, by applying this business logic to every aspect of life, we've made everything a transaction. And at the heart of social entrepreneurship is a move away from this. And it is not a move towards more government control. So if you look at the ideological battles in Europe today and in America, and in America, they're very sharply defined. It's one group of people wants the free market ideology, and the other group of people says we need more government. But social entrepreneurship is like what I call the middle path. It is not a theory that says we need government in every aspect of life. On the other hand, it doesn't say we need the unfettered market to work across all aspects of life. And in that way, what we are looking for is a solution wherein you look. For the first time in human history, we live in an abundance economy. And you understand that in an abundance economy, relationships can be very differently defined. And traditionally, a relationship was, if I go and I buy a part to go in the car, and I'm running an automobile industry, if the guy supplies me the part at 10 and I can get it cheaper from, say, China at 8, then I have an advantage of 2. In the final price of my car. And this is the prevailing business logic in everything. This is the logic that when you buy a cheap airline ticket but we are now moving out of that economy into what I call the abundance economy. And it's a very different philosophy very different way of looking at business relationships. And to me, this underpins the field of social entrepreneurship. And also, when you look at social entrepreneurship in its widest dimension, it's really about finding solutions and incentives and alignments to problems that cannot be solved. Like, I was on a panel recently and the vaccine discussion came on, and I said that, so if you apply the theory of social entrepreneurship, the rich countries need to give the poorest countries the vaccine as quickly as they can. And the reason is that if they don't do it, it will harm their self-interest. Because if the virus mutates in those poor countries rapidly and it gets around the vaccine, then the entire investment that the wealthier countries have in vaccinating their populations will be useless. And there's a whole theory of generosity based on social entrepreneurship. So I believe that generosity makes good business sense. Usually companies put it in the CSR box. They say, okay, social entrepreneurship, we have a CSR box. For me, when you do that, you're clearly saying that CSR and social entrepreneurship are something that happens on the edges of the company. We have a division, we have a vice president. The vice president looks after CSR and social entrepreneurship. So, you have to start with an understanding of what we mean. And to me, the future of business has to start with the idea of social entrepreneurship. If you put it on the outside and you put a sort of junior vice president in charge of it, and they come up at conferences and they talk about their green strategy and they do a greenwash or a whitewash, that is not, in my opinion, it doesn't show that the management of the company has a long-term interest. Because key to any sustainable business of the future is going to be a strong focus on social entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That is a very, very fascinating concept. And now when I would encourage you to dive into, for example, the project or the topic of Fabindia, or you also created or are heavily engaged in Organic India and other initiatives. But Fabindia has also a very, very strong brand here all over the world. So perhaps this is the best example to start with. But before doing so, you have been also opening an office, a family office in Berlin, and I would really, it is a personal feeling which is important to me to express my and our gratitude to Angela De Giacomo, who has brought us together, and she is highly engaged, and I only can congratulate you to have her being your partner and being working together with you. And I think she should really hear that. I'm not sure whether she's listening or watching us now, but she should be aware of our gratitude. Now,
thank you.
Feel free. Yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I think she is on this conference. So let me, now that I've given you an idea of social entrepreneurship, the philosophy, before I go into 2 case studies, because I think that since many of the people attending this call are either studying business or practicing business, let me go into 2 very specific. I'm going to go really, really specific and tell you why this makes sense for a business. But before that, I'm just going to do something. I'm going to advertise my book, because I have written a book about social entrepreneurship, and it's called The Next Enlightenment. And it's really about how human societies can move beyond this place, because we're really stuck. Our politics are stuck, our economics are stuck. And I think that to get unstuck, we need some new ideas. So what are some of these new ideas? So let me start with Organic India. We, many, many years ago, when I was a student, I used to work in an organic farm in the US. And I saw how incredibly different organic farming was from conventional farming. Now, at that time, the prevailing mythology, and I call this mythology because it's actually not truth. It's people at that time spoke of it as if it's a truth, but it's actually not truth, which is that non-organic farms were far more productive, gave you higher yields and all. The truth is very complicated, and I realized that Organic India or organic farming requires a different way of looking at costs and benefits. Because if you apply a conventional lens of costs and benefits, yes, in the short term, organic farming might not be very sustainable, especially in a country like India, where there's a large population and a limited amount of agricultural land. So one of the things that we did was we realized that if we were going to take farmers in India and convert them to organic farming, it's a 3-year process. So we needed to support those farmers through that 3-year process. And what we did was we came up with a unique certification program in which we supported each farmer in their journey to become, to organically certify their farm. And we also helped them with seeds, and we entered into a very long-term partnership. So for the first 10 years of this partnership, the company lost $20 million. But and there were many opportunities in the first 10 years to take a shortcut and start becoming profitable much sooner. But if you look at the foundation that we built, today there is nobody who has the number of farmers that we have who've converted to organic, and there is nobody that we have really no competition. And it took 10 years to build a position which is unassailable in the market. So today we are in the fortunate position that if a European or American brand wants to buy organic herbs from India, especially Ayurvedic herbs, they really have only one place to go for the most trusted herbs. And the way we did that is we partnered with the farmers. For example, we realized one of the biggest problems that the farmers had is that they didn't have health insurance. The other problem is they didn't have the harvest season led to a massive spike in production, and the prices in the local market collapsed. So every year, the same cycle, especially if it was a good year, you would have a bumper harvest, the prices would crash, the farmers were desperate, they needed to sell, they didn't have a holding capacity. So what we did initially is that we created a holding capacity for farmers, and we gave them health insurance. These were the two things that often we noticed that these are the two things that drove the farmers into debt. And the problem with debt is that they used to go to the money lender, and then they would be stuck in a long-term relationship, often growing cash crops that were not particularly remunerative to them, only because the man that they had taken the money from was actually controlling what they would grow. So we broke the dependency, and then we increased their ability to store by creating local drying plants and storage facilities. It was just these two small innovations, which actually, if you look back at it, they cost maybe, each of them cost us, one is a recurring cost, which is several $100,000 a year, but less than $500,000. And the other one is building the one-time cost in building the storage facilities. The result of those was that the farmers had a holding capacity. We were able to guarantee prices at the time of sowing. So we control the price the day the order is given to sow X number of acres. So interestingly enough, when you do that, the farmer has economic security. So they know that on the 90th day when their crop is ready, they are going to get this price for the crop, regardless of how good the crop is. Now, if the crop is not good, we offer them a 15%, we have a 15% upward variance in the price. But the reason we never have to cross 15% is we have the storage of the previous year's crop. So every third year, the farmers tend to have a difficult crop. This is how life is for a farmer. But by making these two innovations, we created what I call a radical realignment. And today, one of India's largest companies, which has gone into agriculture, came and they wanted to go into organics, and they've offered our farmers 20 to 30% more for each of the items that they're growing, because they have the certification with them. And we didn't lose a single farmer. And this to me is the power, the faith. When you put your faith in people and you put your faith in supporting people and supporting communities, they pay you back. The return on whatever support you've given them is huge. I'm not going to say return on capital employed, because this is more than that. The return on the support you give them is 10 times more than what you put in. And to me, this is a really fundamental aspect of this move towards social entrepreneurship, what I mean by social entrepreneurship. And the other case, if we have a few minutes, Dr. Altman, can I go into the other case?
Sure.
Yeah.
Very
so the
interesting.
The other case had to do with one of Fabindia's businesses, which is our home and lifestyle business. And we realized that with our key suppliers, we needed to have a different kind of relationship. And how we defined it is that a manufacturing company gets an EBITDA multiple in valuation of maybe 5 to 10 times, whereas a consumer-facing brand in India today gets an EBITDA multiple of anywhere from 40 to 60 times. So we looked at that differential, and we said to our manufacturers that no matter how big you are, you will never, the market undervalues you. I don't want to say overvalues us, but it gives there's a huge inequality in the valuation. So if you're a consumer-facing brand, you get a very, very high multiple. If you're not a consumer-facing brand, you're a manufacturing brand, you get a very low multiple. So we devised a very simple system. We said, why don't we jointly give you ownership in our home and lifestyle business? You will make the investments in manufacturing and ensure that we get the right product at the right time and the right quality. And this requires very large back-end investments. And we will value your contribution by the amount of GP you give us. And we will give you that, and we will allow you to take equity in our company by doing that. It was a very simple mechanism. I'm making it sound more complicated than it is. So traditionally, if these manufacturers were marking up something 50%, which would give them a gross margin of 33%, they then took a much lower gross margin, passed on the margin to us, made sure that the large extent of working capital requirements were met by them, in return for which they got a piece of a pie that had a much higher valuation. So this is another example for radical realignment, because normally if you're a supplier and you're a buyer, you have a relationship like this, where you push one and they push and they try to find other buyers, and you play this game all the time. And in our case, we decided that with our top manufacturers, we really needed to have a very, very long-term relationship and get them to make the investments to help keep our product lines current for the future. And we did this by this simple mechanism of creating a joint stock ownership company. And so there are many such, I could give you many, many more examples, but I'll stop here. These are instances of what I call radical realignments that help create a new kind of business. So I would be really excited to hear from people if you have any questions or.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I've hardly heard any similarly fascinating, concept, and I'm really, perhaps you do not need my compliments. That's not what I want. I do not want to please you. I really, it's just really, really fascinating, I think, also to our audience. And I see already questions coming in. But first of all, I would like to briefly underline or dive deeper into this starting comment. You mentioned, okay, the free market system has its advantages, but it will lead us into certain directions which are perhaps not favorable for society, climate, and so on. And the other one, very often this is the European way, the continental European way, is to look for government engagement. And you have been expressing now, government engagement is very often government control. And this is perhaps not a favorable way to go. Why would you rather, argue that your concept is the better one and governmental control may be perhaps also misleading into a certain direction?
Wow, that's a big question, Dr. Altman, but I'll try to answer it with a simple example. We are all very concerned about what's happening in Brazil with the incredibly fast destruction of the Amazon. Now, all the scientists studying biodiversity and climate say, we don't know, this is a big question mark, what's going to happen if we destroy the Amazon, because this is really a global sink. And And we don't know what the species loss is going to lead to. We don't know what the climate effects of this destruction are going to be. It's like, as one of them described to me, it's like taking out your liver and your stomach and then thinking, will the patient still live and how will the patient be? So, when you have an issue like this, the first tendency of governments is to come in and make some international treaties or try to. The basic thing that I've seen in India in many places, that if you can align people's interests, and this is what I mean by radical realignments. Let us say that simply the world signed off on a very simple protocol that says for each individual in the world, the government would ensure that each individual had an environmental per capita quota, which is that you create basically an exchange and a currency for an environmental asset like biodiversity. Now, if you map the poorest parts of the world, Dr. Altman, with the wealthiest parts of the world, and then you add biodiversity into that, you find the biodiversity is in the poorest parts of the world, whether in Africa, whether in India, whether in other parts of Asia, whether in the Amazon forest. So basically what you're saying is that if every country has to have a certain amount of an environmental per capita quota per citizen, that is the only thing that government should do. And then after that, let the market forces take over. So rather than bring too much government regulation into something, you basically set the parameter, which only governments can do, and then you let the market forces create an exchange. Now, the forest sanctuary that you went to in India, where you saw some tigers, that has been the site of a lot of the local people are not interested in preserving the tiger. The local people are interested in going there. They want to send their animals to graze, and they want to cut the firewood and the wood and bring it out and sell it, because that for them fulfills an economic need. The tourists who come from all parts of the world, like you, Dr. Altman, want to go there and want to look at the tiger. So how do you create a system where you align the interests of the local people with the sanctuary? Because everybody who goes there said it's beautiful, it's biodiversity, we protected a tiger, so much wildlife, so many species, it's all wonderful. But the people who live around it are interested in going into the forest, cutting the trees, killing the animals, and making some money. And they have a need, and that need must be respected. So what you do is, if you have a system of whereby you have the local community gets an environmental quota credit for every acre of forest that they preserve and the wildlife in it, and that comes to the local people, the equation changes, because you've created a new alignment where the local people are aligned with the greater interest. And similarly, if you look at these kind of alignments, there are hundreds of such alignments that can be made, but it requires governments to change the way they approach a situation. Like I love to hike in the Himalayas, and the area we used to live in had a local spring. Because of environmental degradation, the local spring stopped, and the local government had then to get the water from about 1,500 meters. They had to pump it up from 1,500 meters. So pumping water up 1,500 meters adds tremendously to the GNP of a country, because you've got to build pump houses, buy motors, lay miles of pipe, and do all that. Versus having a spring adds zero to your GNP. And so, I think one of the things that governments should do, and businesses should push them on this, is to throw out this concept of a GDP and a GNP and replace it with what I would call a gross national reserve, which is the reserve of your natural inheritance. And I have a mathematical formula for how to calculate this, which is in the book, but it's been interesting to see if we start with what nature gives us rather than what we create on top of nature. It changes the whole way our economics would work. Just that one simple thing would change, because every country today is saying, oh, our GDP is growing at 8%, somebody's growing at 7%, Europe is growing at maybe 1.5% or 2%. And leaders look on this and say, oh, I'm only growing at 1%. But actually, if we could just change that framework and then let the market forces take over, and governments can nudge market forces to do amazing things. And that's the tool, I think, that's the missing piece in this.
Thank you so much. I'm an economist. I couldn't have argued it in better terms, but, having the credibility and the example and, the evidence is so nice to hear. Now, let me look at my screen, and please apologize, you, Willem, and also the audience, that I once in a while need to look down at my screen to collect questions. And one is from Thomas Osburg. It has come in. He was a innovation manager, quite a high-ranked innovation manager working with Infineon, and he is now a professor in Munich. Now, the question is, recently I read about an entrepreneur in Africa. He wanted to help his community, invented a way to charge your mobile phone while riding a bicycle, and was taking a little money or charge for this service. Is this already social entrepreneurship or not, or does it maybe not matter how we call it?
Well, I think it's just good entrepreneurship. I mean, it's social and it's great, but it's more important than social. It's a great idea because it's good entrepreneurship. Because, when I used to live in the villages of India, we didn't have power for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. Nobody had cell phones in those days. But today, if you want to charge your cell phone and you're bicycling 4 kilometers to work every day, and you can attach a charger that'll charge your phone, this is the most important service that you can provide to consumers. I mean, I think it's great business.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Interestingly, what tends to happen in countries where there's a lot of innovation, you don't have the other parts of the ecosystem, Dr. Altman. One of the things that Germany, America, Israel, and a very few other economies have done is they've created the whole ecosystem. So if this happened in Germany, you'd have a VC fund in Berlin, or an angel fund, not even a VC fund. You'll have an angel fund funding it in the early stage. You'll have an early stage VC fund. You'd have a late stage VC fund. That whole cycle, that whole ecosystem in developed countries, especially in Germany and Austria, the US, Israel, that's very, very well developed. And I find that's lacking in most countries of the world, because if that were there, then an idea like this would find funders instantly.
Thank you so much. Now, another question or a number of questions are coming in, but one has been sent to me by Markus Kittler. He's a professor at the MCI for HR and organizational studies. And he has sent me a number of questions. I hope to be at least able to present some of them. And one is, how do you consider cultural differences among potential customers in different countries with respect to the value they see in social entrepreneurship?
Wow, that's was it Professor Kittler? Am I pronouncing it correct?
Markus Kittler. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So
by the way, excuse me, you have been showing a book, and earlier you've mentioned to me in a pre-meeting that you have been writing a manifesto. So my question briefly is a technical one before you start with your answer, is would it be available to send us the link and also perhaps the manifesto? We would be more than pleased to share the info together with a little, with the live stream, which will stay on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our website also later on, more or less forever, at least for some time, and also to add this info to the live stream.
Sure, I'd be honored to do that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Going back to Professor Kittler's question, what's interesting is that if you look at the older generation, there is a very, very large cultural difference between, say, when we operate in Dubai and when we operate in Singapore and when we operate even in different parts of India. And it's interesting that the way we have handled it in the past is that we have a very wide range of SKUs, stock keeping units. And so the idea is the individual store managers begin to choose their product selection. So if you look at, say, a part of India like Goa, which tends to be have a very strong culture, the shopping patterns there are very distinct from, say, Dubai, and they are in turn very distinct from another part of India, say Calcutta. So in Calcutta, we sell a lot of saris, we sell a lot of very traditional clothes. In Goa, we tend to sell more Western women's clothes. In other parts, we will have to change the product mix constantly. And in terms of working with people, it's interesting that cultural differences in the workplace are very, very pronounced. And one of the cultures that we choose to follow a traditional workplace culture, which is difficult. We have operations in the US, and in the US, the culture is very informal. It's always first name. It's kind of, it's not, there are no structured hierarchies, which is both good and bad. So in those countries, it's a little bit harder because they find our work culture to be maybe a little rigid, but we have to always look for a common denominator when you're working across so many different places. The interesting thing with the younger generation is that is changing. The younger generation is all reading from the same playbook. So whether it's a young Indian will today have much, much more in common with a young German, with a young American, with a young Singaporean. And so those cultural differences are those boundaries, those walls are coming down very quickly. And it's changing with the younger generation much faster.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Another question now in Indian fellow of you. He lives in London and has become a dear friend of the MCI, and his name is Mahinda Kari. He built up Kari Associates in London, and he has sent me, and his background is accountancy, and then again when creating companies, taxation, and all that. And now also fraud. He has also been delivering, guest lectures at the MCI. Now, and this is perhaps the background also of the question I will present now. Now, new ways of finding solutions to organic farming sounds interesting, but how is this organization being funded?
So that's a very interesting question, because in the beginning, this organization was a project of passion. It was a passion of a husband and wife. She was from America. He was actually from Israel, and he was very familiar with the kibbutz movement and agriculture in Israel. And it was originally funded by these two as a passion project to create a better world. They were very idealistic. They are very idealistic. And this was something that they wanted to do. And one of the things that I realized in organic farming is that the way to make it a viable business is to move away initially from simple food crops, because in simple food crops, the margin difference meant that you couldn't produce them efficiently and not have a price difference was less than 50%. So what we did was we started with herbs and teas, especially medicinal teas and wellness teas. So when you moved into the area of herbs, there was much more room to pay the farmers a much higher price. And so as soon as the business began to do this, the profitability of the business, the internal profitability became much higher. We were able to pay the farmers a higher price. We were able to make a decent margin off that price, and the business's viability changed dramatically. We are now going into foods. So I think what strategically would have been a terrible error would have been to go into staple foods, because staple foods is a very, very cost in any country of the world. This is true in every country, where when you're selling wheat and when you're selling rice and all, the margins are wafer thin there. And when you're introducing organic with all its problems and issues in the beginning, you don't want to do your learning there because you will lose a lot of money. So we strategically took a decision to go in for the most exotic herbs. So the more exotic the herb was, the higher the margin you made. Our ability through good marketing and good brand building was to build a large market for those herbs. I'll give you a very small example. When we started working in turmeric, there were only a few fringe retailers in America and nobody in Germany that bought turmeric. Today, you can walk into the basic American supermarket called Costco, and the first thing I saw the last time I went in there was big jars of turmeric. So anti-inflammatory, all these. So one must never forget that what begins on the periphery of something will one day become on the center. And, I think that in planning the product philosophy, you look for outliers, you can make a good margin. As they come into the center, the volumes increase exponentially and it works, it helps sustain the business. Mr. Kari, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you very much, William. He has sent me another one, is more about some figures and info about the formal structure. I mean, figures, employees, whatever, turnover, whatever you would like to share. Please do not feel obliged to give us any secrets. And perhaps linked to the question, is there any ideal formal structure related to social entrepreneurship? Organizational model, yeah? Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have no problem sharing the figures. Our sales this year for organics will be about $60 million. The greatest low-hanging fruit for the business is the wastage, is minimizing the wastage from farm to ultimately the product reaching the consumer. There are many kinds of wastages, and one of them is expiry date wastage. The other one is the conversion wastage and all. So, if you look at the farmer getting 100 out of an end price of 500, the balance 400, there are lots of cost savings there. So our effort in the business is to grow it profitably, because today we are at a point where we can 5x the turnover in 3 years without a problem. But that will lead to the profitability of the business declining substantially. So what I'm trying to do is first profitability for long term, and then look at growth in top line. And in that way, we're pursuing a slightly different strategy of making top line growth secondary to profitability.
Mm-hmm. And about Fabindia, perhaps some info about size or whatever, employees or something like that.
So Fabindia pre-COVID, we were about $200 million in top line, and we the main business accounts for about 70, which is the clothing business accounts for about 75% of sales. The interesting thing in the case of Fabindia is that we are pivoting the business away from being a brick and mortar retailer. We are building a very large e-commerce business within the company. This year, we hope the e-commerce business will be around $40 million in top line. This has been helped, of course, by the fact that during the pandemic, the stores have been closed, and so customers have to go online. But what's interesting for us is we're pivoting the retail business into becoming a lifestyle brand. And the idea of a lifestyle brand is that it becomes an experiential lifestyle brand, because no business will have the power to take on the big internet companies, the e-commerce companies in India. So we're really building what I call a H2H platform, which is a human-to-human platform. So in our stores, we have 27 stores that we have converted out of a portfolio of 340 stores. We've converted 27 stores to this format. And in this format, it's really about lifestyle experiences and all the things that you can't get online. So you don't want to go head to head and compete with a service that you can get online, because we believe that in India, there are 3 or 4 very large players. There's Reliance, there's Amazon, there's Walmart, Flipkart, all of whom are pouring money into this area. The Tatas have entered as well. So our strategy is to really not go into the blue ocean where the big ships are sitting, but our strategy is to play, on the coastline and really offer certain services that you cannot get on e-commerce. For example, I'll give you you can walk into our experience centers, and in 1 hour, you can have something you buy altered to fit you even better. So that's a service you can't get online. And our idea is the more of these services we provide, the more protected we will be from a direct competition with the e-commerce players.
Mm-hmm. Franco Severini from Verona has sent me a question which goes into the direction of bottlenecks. What is the biggest bottlenecks you feel when you do your business, or when you want to grow your business? Is it regulation? Is it people? Is it culture? Is it finance? Is it market? Whatever. What kind of bottlenecks would you see? What kind of blockages would you see to be lifted to allow further growth or larger engagement?
So in answer to Mr. Severini, we have two major bottlenecks. One of them is our competitors have access to unlimited capital, because many of our competitors are based in jurisdictions which allow multiple classes of shares. And my knowledge of German and Austrian corporate law doesn't, I don't know whether you allow multiple classes of shares, but interestingly, the US, Singapore, and many jurisdictions are now allowing you to have non-voting shares or limited voting shares. And those companies, the NASDAQ is full of them, but they're opening up all over, and we don't have access to that kind of capital. And that is because in India, the corporate law doesn't differentiate between ownership of votes and ownership of profits. So that, I would say, in the future is going to be our largest bottleneck. We will only be able to raise capital by significantly diluting the stake of not only our stake, but the stake of the others, the initial founders of Fabindia, who really believe in the philosophy of the company. And that's a decision which is a difficult decision to take, because we have to balance, the business's requirement for capital with, losing control, because we have typically been a business that thinks in 10-year cycles, and the market is thinking on a quarter-to-quarter cycle. The other bottleneck we face is a managerial bottleneck, which is that when you have a complex company with many interdependencies, you need very strong management teams that work as teams. And we've had this bottleneck for several years, and we've solved it now by bringing in and onboarding a management consulting group, which is one of the big management consulting groups. And they're basically going to be embedded in us and help all the key leaders and managers with planning, sequencing, task management, to help them like a super program management office. We should have done this. I would say we should have done this 5 years ago. It was not something this will ease we're already seeing this easing the bottlenecks tremendously. So on the first problem, we don't have a solution yet. And on the second problem, we found a solution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. You've been mentioning briefly the ideal legal form, perhaps, of such initiatives, and you are not familiar with perhaps European or Austrian corporate law. But what would you think about the cooperative? Being aware of the fact that cooperatives may perhaps have a different legislatory framework in India and in Germany and in France or whatever, or in the United States. But basically, the idea of a cooperative, how would you see that?
India has one extraordinarily successful cooperative, which is called Amul, which owns the brand Amul, which is a series of dairy cooperatives in the state of Gujarat, which is owned by farmers. And I think it is probably considered to be the world's most successful experiment in cooperatives. The problem with cooperatives is they don't issue shares, at least in the Indian version. Indian cooperative law is very specific, and it doesn't give you a share. And it doesn't, how you build consensus, voting consensus in cooperatives is very it hasn't advanced, let's say, since the 1940s. So basically, the bulk of corporate law in India came to happen, say, from 1949 to 55, and there hasn't been much advancement in that. So essentially, it's a very poor structure for delegating to a management team. It's a very good structure from the point of view of sharing the profits and sharing the wealth, but it is a poor structure from a management control point of view. One of the things that America is leading in the world is it is innovating corporate law at a phenomenal speed. America has come up with concept after concept that allows entrepreneurs to share wealth, leverage their control, many things. Some of them have some negative consequences, which is leading to, I think, this vast disparity in wealth in the world. But as a place to study innovation in corporate law, I mean, the states of Delaware, and maybe there are a few other states in America, are incredible about adopting all these new legal formats, some of which are not, I don't think they're good for shareholders, for social entrepreneurship, but it is an amazing place to study what is happening in corporate law, because what they do today, the rest of the world adopts 20, 30 years later in different forms.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm jumping to a different question now. Lisa Campbell, if I'm not mistaken, she is an MCI alumna, now placed in Manchester, UK, and she has sent me a question regarding if you had 1, 2, 3 wishes to governments to support the idea of social entrepreneurship, what kind of wishes would you express or requests?
3, gosh. Okay. The first one is very easy, which is to give the poor right to title. There's an amazing book called The Mystery of Capital by Hernando Soto, a Peruvian economist. It is really the most, if governments were just to implement what Hernando Soto says in his book, it would probably eliminate half of poverty from across the world. So it's basically the poor access to title, because the poor do not have access to title. For me, the second area is to value parts of the human experience that governments do not place a value on right now, and allow the market forces to work in those areas. And I'll suggest that you look at there have been some studies in green capitalism, also some work I've done in my book that talks more about this. But we really have to value the assets of the poor, and we have to value the assets of community. And that is, once you value them and you create certain standards, then the market forces will do a very good job of sharing wealth. And I'm a great believer in that. I think the third area is that governments around the world know how to provide good nutrition. The science of it is completely worked out. And one of, to my mind, the greatest stumbling block in a child's life is that when they do not get access to good nutrition in their early years, their mental development, their physical development, everything is, so they lose from the day they start. And I think that is the greatest tragedy of the world in the 21st century, that it costs nothing. I mean, and we know there are companies that the UN works with that create these highly nutritious biscuits that have all the basic nutrients in them. Governments have cracked it. I mean, scientists know it, governments know it, and it's so inexpensive and so easy to do that this is one thing that, if children could get access to decent nutrition, because once you don't have good nutrition as a child, you are handicapped for the rest of your life. No matter what other things, good things happen, you are always going to be handicapped on that. So I think these are the 3 things that could really move the agenda.
Now, Xavier Renaud, he sits in Lyon, and he is a foreign exchange student of the MCI, now at the partner university in Lyon, France. And he has sent me a question going like this. what would be your desire if you had requests towards universities like the MCI? What kind of request would you express?
Well, I don't know if the MCI has an internship program, but some of the very good universities in India and in the US have internship programs where the University Career Counseling Office, and it's part of the academic framework. The professors encourage students to spend their summers doing internships, take a year between when you start and graduate to do a year-long internship, bring your learnings back to the classroom. I think that at the stage of life that students are, universities like MCI should encourage students to do not conventional internships, but to do things that are really speak to their what excites them, their passion, their purpose. Even if it's about helping this man in Africa with the bicycles and the cell phone charger, raise money, go out and spend 6 months or 3 months or whatever. I think these kind of internships would be incredibly useful for the university and for the students. And as part of their academic coursework, they would bring the practical experiences back. Now, I don't know about MCI's work, but I know that increasingly there are universities in the US that are really encouraging this. And I think it's good for the students and for the university.
Mm-hmm. To give a short answer, our career activities include roughly 700 one-semester internships, which are heavily supported by the MCI, not pretending that there wouldn't be room for improvement. Everyone has a potential for improvement, and not pretending that everything is gold here. But we actually, what I would support the idea is to support the ideas of importance of such internship activities. And I feel heavily supported by your comment that this is very valuable, and we see this also. Now, Mahinda Kari, excuse me, then I see that we have been exploiting your time. Then I fear we need to come to an end soon. But perhaps 1 or 2 questions would be still possible. One is from Mr. Mahinda Kari in London. Now, Fabindia's brand value, the name, the brand, makes the actual product value quite costly for the average Indian. Is the Fabindia name being also sold or lent like a designer's label? How would you see that?
That's an interesting question. So when somebody a few years ago asked me what the value of a brand is, and I would always say the value of a brand is the ability to price above commodity. So if you have, I remember when I would go shopping to the grocery store in America, there were bananas, and then there were bananas that carried a label of a company. And I don't know why, but I always thought I should buy the bananas with the label, even though it's the same thing. So before we discuss Fabindia, I'd just say that the power of a brand is its ability to price something above a commodity. Now, this leads you to two questions. One is it artificial pricing, or is there something real that the customer is getting? Now, in the past, good marketing departments have been able to take something with the same value, like a T-shirt made in the same factory, say in China or Vietnam, and it has a label of a dog or a pony or a whatever, alligator, and it has the label. And because it has that label, the customer is willing to take a T-shirt that might cost $4 and pay $40 for it, or even $400 for it. On the other hand, if it didn't have the label, the customer would pay maybe $12 for the T-shirt. So to me, the T-shirt is a commodity. The label, the brand, is the ability to price up above the commodity. That has been the traditional marketing theory that has held sway for a long time. Today, I think that another way a brand can be perceived is that, look, if a customer feels that I want to consume in a way that changes the world, and I want to buy from a brand which I know is going to be more expensive, but I know it's going to be made in a particular way, it's going to be created it's going to stand for certain values, and I'm willing to pay for that, then it's a decision that a willing customer makes. Mm-hmm. So one is the snob value of having a symbol on your chest, say a donkey, and you have the symbol of a donkey, and basically it's the same T-shirt that you can get for $12 that you just paid $80 for, but you want to wear that symbol of the donkey and you meet your friends. I mean, that's marketing driven brand value. The other one is that you really care about what the brand stands for and how the brand operates, and then you're willing to pay the higher price for it. And so it's really it's interesting, because to me a lot of brands that do great work in social entrepreneurship aren't able to command that premium in pricing. And to me, this is an area that I've helped brands. I've consulted, advised brands. I've helped people do this, because I feel that if your brand does stand for something more, and you do, and that is represented in the product you sell, you should be able to get a premium. But it's a challenge. We are lucky that our customers believe in us and that they pay the premium, both for Fabindia and for Organic India. And we're thankful to those customers.
Perhaps one last final question coming from myself is, now listening to your insight. Now, what would you say was the most difficult decision you ever had to make? Perhaps maybe 2 or 3, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, Dr. Altman, it's a good question, because the most difficult decision of my working life I have to make every week these days. We are in the middle of a terrible pandemic, and it has caused a massive amount of suffering and pain in our entire supply chain and to our employees, many of whom their family members are sick or they themselves have been sick. Normally, when a business sales drop by 90% because of the lockdown, you would cut costs. But in this situation, because the safety net for people is very low, if you put people out of employment and you cut jobs and you don't keep the cycle going with your vendors, some of them will suffer tremendously. And the difference between, say, I guess if you lose your job in Austria, you get state support and you are helped out. You're not going to be on the street starving. In our situation, the situation is much more dramatic. So the hardest decision I've had to make is every week I sit with the leadership teams and the financial people and say, can we continue to go deeper and deeper in debt to honor our commitments when there's very little coming in? And that's a difficult decision, because this is where all your theories of social entrepreneurship meet the hard edge of economic reality. There's an American expression called "when the rubber hits the road," and really it's been a very stressful time. I had fewer white hair. If you'd done this interview a year ago, I would have had fewer white hair than I do now. But it is a difficult decision. We've decided to continue to honor all our obligations and commitments as long as we can. And fortunately, the banks and financial institutions have been amazing.
Wonderful to hear that, and also very, very much. I'm more than excited to listen to this story, and I'm grateful, and I think we all and the society should be grateful for what you've been doing, and I'm personally now grateful for what you've been sharing with us. Thank you so much, Mr. William Bissell, now presently being in Delhi, New Delhi, and for sharing your views. we wish you all support you and all the luck you not only deserve, it could be even more, should be more, whatever may be in favor of you. Thank you so much. And before we close this event, I would like to thank our partners again, to thank Angela De Giacomo again, to thank my media team again, our technicians, our alumni association, and many more, and give you a little preview on upcoming events. Already this afternoon, now at Central European Time, Mitteleuropäische Zeit, 1705 p.m. this afternoon, we will have the opportunity and pleasure and the honor to welcome Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker, the long-term president of the European Commission. Already the event will be the Zukunft von Europa, the future of Europe. So please take the opportunity to be with us today at 5 p.m. Tomorrow also at 5 p.m. This goes into your direction, William. Brigitte Mohn, she's member of the executive board of Bertelsmann Stiftung, and we will welcome and discuss how to change the world into a sustainable future. And we will be welcoming change makers from around the globe. And on Monday, the 21st, we will welcome in our series Robin Dunnigan. She is the chargée d'affaires of the US Embassy in Vienna, embassy to Austria. Now, she will speak about the foreign policy of the Biden administration. So take the opportunity and send us questions. And now, once again, thank you so much, William, for being with us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Altman, and I wish you and all the listeners all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.